One of my favourite stories in the Gospels is found in John chapter 6, where we read the story of when Jesus fed the 5,000. So many things that I love about this story. I think maybe it's because many times a day, sometimes it feels like I can relate to the story on some kind of level, you know. The story's a bit like this. There's a whole huge crowd that have come to hear Jesus and hear what he's got to say. It's 5,000 of them. And it gets to the point in time where they all want to sit down and have some lunch. And realizing that they have this situation where there's all these hungry people and there's no food around to give them. You know, there was no supermarkets nearby. There was no kind of artisan bakery on the hillside or some big catering company in the local vicinity. There was nothing. There was just 5,000 hungry people and no food to give them. And seeing the situation, Jesus turns to one of his disciples, to Philip, and he says, "Hey, Philip, what are we going to do about this situation? How are we going to feed these people? Where should we get bread for them to eat?" Now, Philip was an amazing disciple. He was known as the evangelist. And by this point in time, when this story is playing out, he'd been traveling with Jesus for quite a while, and he would have seen Jesus perform many healings and signs and wonders. And so his response to Jesus in this moment, it both fascinates me and it also surprises me when he replies and says, well, 6 months' wages wouldn't be enough to buy bread and everyone to have just a bite. And to be fair to Philip, his answer was true. It was factually correct. But then another answer comes along. And suddenly here comes this little boy walking towards them and holding in his hands just a small amount of fish and bread. Now, what happens next is really interesting. You see, Jesus and the disciples, they both saw exactly the same thing. They both saw coming towards them a small boy holding in his hands a little bit of fish and a little bit of bread. But how they responded to what they saw is totally different. You see, if you read the story, it says the disciples saw the boy and his little lunch offering that he bought to give to them to feed the people, and they say, well, how far will that go among so many? It's not enough. But Jesus, he sees this little boy with this tiny little packed lunch, this small and insignificant, sizable offering in the face of the huge challenge that's all around him. And he sees, he goes, this is perfect. This is perfect. This is exactly what I'm going to use. Tell everybody to sit down. They're about to eat lunch. And he takes hold of that small little offering, that tiny little packed lunch. He takes hold of it and then he begins to fill it with himself. And suddenly, a beautiful miracle begins to take place. I remember the first time we ever saw the multiplication of food, it was Christmas time. It was quite a few years ago, and we decided to throw a huge Christmas banquet for some of the slum members in a particular slum community. And so we invited everybody to come, and we didn't have much money. We didn't have much resources in those days. We still don't have a lot, to be honest. So all of our staff began to empty out their pockets, and we pulled all our cash together, and we had just enough money to pay some women in our village to cook just enough food for the amount of people we invited. And so the party began, and we had these huge big saucepans, you know, of rice and beans and beef and matoke, and we started to serve the food. And as I was watching the whole thing play out, I began to notice that there were people joining the back of the food queue who hadn't been invited to the party. And very quickly, I came to understand that word had spread around the whole of the kind of surrounding community, that free food was being held and given out at the local church hall. And so people were coming from all over the place. Hungry people were coming from all over the place and just joining the queue, expecting to be fed. And as I'm stood there watching it, I realised I'm in a bit of a predicament. You see, I knew exactly how much food we had and exactly how many people we could feed. And I'm watching the size of the queue, and I'm realising that there are many, many, many more people than we've catered for waiting to be fed. And I also knew that slum culture, being as volatile as it is, that if we didn't feed everyone who is expecting to be fed, there would be some serious trouble. So I went to where our team was serving the food, where the big saucepans were, and I remember saying to them, listen guys, there's more people here than we'd imagined, so you need to reduce your portion size, like just small portions. And they all nodded at me like, yes, Nicola, absolutely, totally fine. And then I watched them continue to serve these like mountains of food to each person, like, oh my goodness. So I thought, well, I probably need to just go and cut the queue off, right? So I went to where the door was, and I was about to sort of form like a kind of human shield and say, I'm sorry, but actually nobody else can come in. And I heard Jesus speak to me. And he simply said, Nicola, feed everyone, refuse no one. And so I responded straight away. I was like, Jesus, you don't understand. We don't have enough food. And I heard it again, feed everyone, refuse no one. I'm like, Lord, we have enough food for 300 people. There are so many more people queuing than that. We haven't got what we need. And I heard him a third time, feed everyone, refuse no one. Now, I've come to learn over the years that when you hear Jesus say something 3 times, you better pay attention. So I just let people continue to come in, and I'm nervous and I'm watching, and I start to help serve the food, and there's mountains going out. And then suddenly I discovered that we'd reached the end of the queue and everybody had had food. So I turned around to kind of high five all my team members and go, great job, well done for making the food stretch. And I'm like, oh no, Nicola, you don't understand. Look inside the saucepans. And as I looked down into the saucepans, I saw that we had almost as much food as when we began. And to be honest, I was just really confused. I was like, well, that doesn't really make any sense. Like, I'm pretty good at maths. I thought I'd work this out really well. So I'm like, well, let's invite everybody up for seconds. If anybody wants some more, the whole place comes back. And we fed every single person a second time. I went back to the serving area and I looked in the saucepans, and we still had huge amounts of food left. So we called up and said, anybody want thirds? Nobody wanted, they'd eaten their fill. So I remember saying to the team, well, let's pick the saucepans up then and walk around the local community and give the food away. And I have these photographs of me and my husband holding these massive saucepans. They were hot and heavy, and walking around the whole surrounding community shouting out, does anybody want some free food? And people started to come from all over the area. And if they had buckets or jerry cans, they brought those and we would pour the food in, you know. And if they didn't own a container, they would just come with a carrier bag. And we would pour the food in, and they would tie the handle up, and they would hug us, and then they'd make their way home. And we walked around the whole of the surrounding community, and we got to the last house, and then the food ran out. And it was at that point I realised we've just seen a miracle. And I think this has been our testimony of the last 10 years, that time and time and time again we have seen Jesus come and take hold of our small little offering, the offering of ourselves, of our lives, of our little lives just laid down. He's taken that offering of our not enough in the face of huge challenge, and he's come and he's filled it with himself over and over and over. And we've begun to see miracles take place. You see, this is the thing that I've learned over the years. Our circumstance does not get to define who he is. It works the other way around. Who he is defines our circumstance. Circumstance said 5,000 hungry people and a tiny little lunch. But then Jesus comes and he takes that little and he fills it with himself, and suddenly it is enough. And I don't know what situations you're facing in your life. I don't know what your hungry 5,000 is, but I do know this. God is with you in the midst of your challenge. And as we lay our lives down before him, as we lay ourselves each morning before him as an offering, he comes. He is present, and he continually fills us with himself, and he begins to work out his perfect plan, both in us and through us. And he's trustworthy in that. Does it mean that the outworking of that will always look like what we want it to, or what we expect it to look like? Probably not. But we can trust that in all things and in all situations and in all circumstances, he is faithful, he is trustworthy, and he is good. And he is with you. So I pray today that your heart would be strengthened and encouraged in that truth, and that you would know his presence tangibly all around you and everywhere you go. Amen.